Hey everyone, today I have another tier list for you guys. I'm going to be ranking all mages in the Smite. There are about 35 of them. I'm going to be ranking their kits based on how well I think their kits work in the Joust game mode. I don't take into account any sort of items, any maps, any comps. I really try to focus on the kits themselves. To jump straight to the scoring categories, you can go to about 45 seconds, but if you're somebody that comes back to my channel often, you've seen my content before, you think it's helpful or you've enjoyed it, please consider giving me a sub. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2022, and each one helps me hit that goal. All right, enough of the shameless self-promo. Let's get into how I'm going to score these gods and how those scores correlate to tiers. I've decided on 6 scoring criteria that I think make a good mage kit in Joust. I'm going to score each of those criteria from 1 to 5, and the higher score at the end of that total means that that mage is higher in the tier list. Let me break down each of these criteria a little more closely. The first thing I'll be looking at is poke. I've defined that as ability to do damage from distance. How close does a mage need to be to the other team to get their damage off? Next thing I'll be evaluating is crowd control, not only the number of crowd control abilities a mage has in their kit, but how valuable those types of crowd control are. Burst is the next criteria on my list. You can think about burst as how much damage can somebody output in a short amount of time. The more damage in a short time means a higher burst score. Objective utility is probably the least straightforward criteria on this list, but does a mage have something to tank towers or secure a bull demon? Anything like that will contribute to a higher objective utility score. Survivability, does a mage have anything in their kit to help them peel for themselves, get enemies off of them, and survive when they're getting dove, because most mages will be getting dove in Joust. And lastly, we have team fight. Does a mage have anything in their kit to help other team members secure a kill or keep other team members alive? Anything like that will help contribute to team fight score. Now that you know the individual scoring criteria, what I'm going to do is take all of those individual scores, add them up, and the total will determine where the mages land in my tier list. Here's a quick breakdown of my tiers. D tier is 0 to 12. Avoid these gods pretty much at all costs unless you know what you're doing. C, below average, you're making it harder on yourself and your teammates to win. B is average tier. You can kind of slot these guys in anywhere and it's going to be okay. They're not going to excel, but they'll be all right. A, above average, you can pick these guys into pretty much any comp or any situation and they're going to do well. And then S is the best tier overall. They have the best kits for Joust. These are first picks or bans in like a ranked competitive mode. Quick disclaimer, I do think you can win with any god in Joust. It really does come down to individual skill, team communication, execution, but this tier list should be a nice little head start for you to see who's better and who it's going to be easier to win with. All right, now that you know about the individual scoring criteria and the tier list itself, let's get into the individual god rankings. Since we're going in alphabetical order, the first mage on our list is Agni. I gave Agni a 4 out of 5 in poke. He does have the ability to hit Flame Wave from 50 units away. He kind of extend that with Noxious Fumes, which is a 55 unit ability, but can also be triggered by Flame Wave to hit a radius of 20 additionally. And then also he can hit his ults from 70 units away. So overall he has a lot of ways that he can damage the enemy from a long ways away. Crowd control, I gave Agni a 3 out of 5. He only has one 1-second stun in his kit, but because of how that stun can be used in many different ways, it is very valuable. You can use it to stun an enemy that's on top of him. You can also use it to stun an enemy at range, and then you can get 2 to 3 Agni bombs off on him. So even though he doesn't have a large amount of CC, the CC is very good. Burst, I gave Agni a 4 out of 5. He can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time, especially with the stun into alt combo. He can usually take out a squishy's health in about 3 seconds. Objective utility, he gets a 3 out of 5. He has a long range ult that does a lot of damage and can confirm things like Bull Demon, but outside of that, pretty average as far as getting other objectives. Survivability, I gave Agni a 3 out of 5. He does have the longest dash in the game at 55 units, and he has the stun in his kit that can help him peel for himself, but he has no real way to get over or around walls, and he roots himself in his ultimate, which puts him in kind of vulnerable positions, so just kind of average at survivability. When it comes to team fight, I gave Agni a 3 out of 5. He does have the versatility of using stuns in a team fight to either set up for his teammates or set up for himself, and he does bring pretty decent damage, but those things are just good and not necessarily great. If we add all those scores up, Agni gets a total of 20 out of 30. That puts him in our A tier. Next up, we have Puch, everyone's favorite god of decay. I gave Apwash 4 out of 5 in the poke category. 2 of his abilities can hit at 55 range, 1 of his abilities can hit at 60 range, and his ultimate can hit at up to 80 range. So all 4 of his abilities can do damage from a long ways away. And if you've ever been hit by an Undead Surge Corpse Explosion combo, you know that it can be a lot of damage at range. Crowd control, Apwash gets a 2 out of 5. He does have a up to 40% slow in his kit. That's his really only consistent way to CC. He also has a 1.5 second stun, but that is very, very dependent on the enemy team having healing. So overall, crowd control is pretty weak. Burst, Apwash gets a 3 out of 5. If he hits all 3 of his abilities, he can have a lot of damage in a short amount of time, but that is, again, very dependent on if he can hit those and if your enemies are kind of brain dead. He does have a ton of damage in his ultimate, but that is a longer period of time, so a lot of damage, just not quite in that short time period that you want from a mage. Objective utility, I gave Apwash a 2 out of 5. The only real way I see him bringing value to those objective fights is his ultimate, used as a zoning tool, but again, not a lot of ways that he is good around objectives. Survivability, Apwash also gets a 2 out of 5. He can consume his own corpses, which give him percent health and percent mana, which can buy time a little bit when he's being dove, but in most cases, it's pretty easy to dive him and kill him compared to a lot of other mages. Teamfight, I gave Apwash a 4 out of 5. He has a 40% anti-heal on his abilities. He has 60% anti-heal on his ultimate. The ultimate is huge. One of the best ways to counter healing teams and just turn the fight in your favor if you're all fighting in his ultimate. Adding all these scores up, Apwash gets a total of 17 out of 30, which puts him in our B tier. Alright, we're going from the Mayan god of the dead, basically, to the Egyptian god of the dead, Anubis. Anubis gets 2 out of 5 in poke. His Plague of Locusts is 40 units, which puts him inside auto attack range. Mummify is a 70 unit max stun, but it doesn't do damage. Plague of Locusts is 55 units, but it's a tick ability, so it's really not significant damage at range. And then his ultimate, which is a 70 unit range, is not consistent enough to hit and give him a good poke score. Anubis gets a score of 3 out of 5 in crowd control. Mummify, a great stun up to 2 seconds at max level, but not that consistent to hit. Grasping Hands also gives a 25% slow, but it's a kind of small area, so he has good crowd control, not great. Burst, Anubis gets a 5 out of 5. I don't care what god you're playing as or what your build is. If you get hit by a Mummify Death Gaze combo and you don't have beads, you're dying in 2 seconds. Objective utility, I gave Anubis a 4 out of 5 due to the passive lifesteal he has in his kit and the 450% power scaling he has on Death Gaze, his ultimate. He's one of the only non-ADC mages that can effectively solo Bull Demon, and if you get him into the enemy's Titan room, it's one of the quickest ways to kill the Titan in the game. Survivability, Anubis gets a 1 out of 5. Aside from the lifesteal that he has in his kit, which can be negated by Ankh pretty easily, the only self-peel he has is a slow and a root, which isn't that easy to hit. He roots himself in his 1, he roots himself in his ultimate, so if you bait out his abilities, he gets jumped on pretty easily without any way to defend himself. Teamfight, Anubis gets a 2 out of 5. He does steal some protections as a possibility. He does have a long range stun that can help to set up his teammates, but outside of that, everything he does is pretty single target focused and doesn't bring that much to a teamfight compared to other mages. When we add all these scores up, Anubis gets a total of 17 out of 30, which puts him in our B tier. The next mage assassin we have on our list is Kuang. As far as poke goes, Kuang gets a 1 out of 5. He does have a 55 unit ability that he can throw out that's kind of a line single target type ability. Outside of that, his other damage is a 30 unit range. His ultimate is a 17 unit range, and a lot of his damage comes out in auto attack form, so he has to be very, very close to you to do any damage. Crowd control, he also gets a 1 out of 5. He can do a 30% slow up to 2.5 seconds on a single target, but not that easy to hit. And then his ultimate, which can be used as a banish, is also cleansed very easily by beads, and it really doesn't help your teammates to follow up that well. As far as burst goes, Kuang gets a 3 out of 5. The reason he gets this score is he doesn't necessarily have to do 100% of an enemy's health as damage to kill them. He really only needs to do 70% because his execute is a 30% threshold. Objective utility, Kuang gets a 3 out of 5 because he does get increased power on his auto attacks. He can shred through objectives pretty easily. Survivability, Kuang gets a 2 out of 5. He can do some shifty things with his water illusion, but it's only a 30 unit teleport. If he gets damaged, he gets out of that. And then the only other peel he has is kind of a fairly weak slow, and then the banish on his ultimate. Team fight, Kuang gets a 2 out of 5. Everything that he wants to do is close range and single target, which isn't that great in the Joust game mode. He can get interrupted pretty easily. He can finish off kills, which helps in a team fight, but outside of that, he's pretty weak. As I joked about in Kuang's kind of intro, his kit is definitely more suited towards a jungle role in like a conquest game mode. Because of that, he struggles in Joust. His overall score is a 12 out of 30, which puts him in our D tier. Next up, we have the goddess of beauty, Aphrodite. Poke, Aphrodite gets a 2 out of 5. Her kiss, which is a stun, can hit at 55 units, which is auto attack range. Lovebirds can hit at 70 units, but it's kind of a slow ability, so it's pretty easy to juke. She doesn't do a ton of damage at range. Aphrodite gets a 3 out of 5 in crowd control. She has a long range stun that lasts for 1 second. They can set up for her or her allies. If enemies jump on her or get close to her, she does have a 25 unit knockback, which is good for peel for herself. And then if she's attached to an allied god and hits her back off ability, it also has a slow attached to it, so it can set her allies up for the kill. Aphrodite gets a 2 out of 5 in burst. A lot of her damage comes from her Lovebird's ability, which is damage over time, tick damage versus kind of one-time damage burst. Her knockback can do a lot of damage, but it's really dependent on the enemies being close to you, so not that effective in the burst category. Objective utility, Aphro gets a 2 out of 5. She does have healing in her kit. She does have a save your teammate, save yourself type ult that allows you to siege for a little bit longer than normal, but that's really it when it comes to objectives. Survivability, Aphro gets a 3 out of 5. She can survive longer than most mages. She has a knockback that can peel for herself. She has a stun that she can use to peel for herself. Her ultimate is a get out of jail free card as far as saving your own life if you're really in trouble, but any sort of real coordinated sustained dive with any sort of anti-heal on the other team usually allows them to kill Aphro because she doesn't have mobility. Team fight, Aphro gets a 4 out of 5. This is one area where she does excel. Because of her passive, she gets more protections the closer she is to the enemy team, so that's always good for team fights. She has healing, which is great for sustain, and then she obviously has her ultimate that can be connected to a teammate. They'll do more damage, and she can save herself and the teammate, CC, cleanse them. There's just a lot of ways that she can be useful in these team fights in Joust. Overall, Aphrodite gets a 16 out of 30, which puts her in our B tier. Next up, to Grandmother's fucked up house we go. We're ranking Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga gets a 4 out of 5 in the poke category. All of her 1 abilities have at least 60 range, and the Y shape actually has a range up to 85, which is some of the longest range in the entire game. Her Baba's Brew also hits at 65 range, so another long range ability. And then finally her ultimate also hits at 65 range, so some of the most consistent, longest damage that you can find around. And as an added bonus, it can also all go over walls. Crowd control, Baba Yaga gets a 3 out of 5. She does have a possible up to 4-second slower silence in the field that she leaves behind on her 1, but due to the nature of her kit, that's somewhat random, so you need to be able to know when to use those effectively. And then she also has a fairly strong knock-up on her ultimate. Burst, Baba Yaga gets a 4 out of 5. She's able to put one of her brews in her pocket, which allows her a huge amount of burst from just the Baba's Brew alone. If she hits both of those, and let's say they're both damage, she also then has the damage from her 1, which is pretty significant. And then ultimately, if she needs to ult, all of her bolts do a ton of damage too. Objective utility, Baba gets a 3 out of 5. She does have a lot of burst ability that can help kill some of the objectives. She has a little bit of zoning in her ultimate, but outside of that, no really great way to secure objectives compared to other mages. Survivability, Baba gets a 3 out of 5. Her dash can go over certain walls in Joust, but it's pretty easily interrupted by the enemy team, so that doesn't make it quite as safe. And then her ultimate does provide her a shield based on magical power, which is really nice as far as scaling goes. Team fight, Baba Yaga gets a 4 out of 5. She can just bring a ton of chaos to a team fight, whether it's a last minute silence on the enemy team, a slow, or to speed your own team up to catch up to enemies that are running away. Her ultimate, ton of damage, ton of area damage, and again, she's hard to kind of lock down, so she does bring a lot to Joust team fights. That means overall, Baba Yaga gets a 21 out of 30, which puts her in our A tier. Next up, we have the voodoo god of life, death, and partying, Baron Samedi. Baron Samedi gets a 4 out of 5 when it comes to poke. Vivid Gaze, his one ability, can be hit at 60 range. Consigned Spirits, his second ability, can be hit at 55 range, but it also has a 18 radius, so effectively it can be hit at more than 70 units range. And then his root, his 3, which can set him and his teammates up for more abilities, also hits at 60 range. Baron also has very good crowd control. I gave him a 4 out of 5. His 3 is a ramp to root, which means if you hit it, it slows the enemy for 1.75 seconds, and then it also roots them for another 0.75 after that. If he has full Hysteria, that also lashes out and hits other enemy gods, so multiple forms of CC on the enemy team is always good. He also has a Vortex in his ultimate that sucks enemies towards him, and if they get all the way to Baron, they're stunned after that for 1.5 seconds, so some of the strongest CC as a mage. Baron can have good burst. I gave him a 3 out of 5 because it is really dependent on multiple abilities hitting or the ultimate sucking him all the way into Baron to get that stun and get the burst off. Objective utility, I gave Baron a 2 out of 5. He doesn't have a lot that can really secure objectives that effectively compared to other mages, and his sustain is reliant upon hitting enemy gods, so not as consistent in that objective category. Survivability, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He has healing in his kit, which can help him live a little bit longer. He has a CC immune ult, which can save him from some things, but he doesn't have great mobility, and usually he can only survive for so long before the enemy kills him. Team fight, I gave Baron a 4 out of 5. He does have a ton of tools that can help with that 3v3. He has multiple ally heals. He has a Vortex in his ultimate that can single out enemy gods, that can pull him out of position. So there are a lot of things and a lot of ways that Baron can use to be a really good asset in team fights. Overall, Baron gets a 20 out of 30, which puts him in our A tier. Next mage we have on our list is Chang'e and her Wascally Wabbit. Chang'e just simply doesn't have a very good poke. Her 1 ability, she has to hit within a 40 unit range. Her 3 is within a 30 unit range, even closer. Her ultimate can hit within 70 units, but you're not using her ultimate for poke, so she just doesn't have that poke ability, which is why I gave her a 2 out of 5. Crowd control, she also gets a 2 out of 5. She has a very, very minimal amount of crowd control in her kit. She just has the stun on her ultimate. However, if she does hit that stun on multiple people, it is a really, really good CC. So how it works is that it's a 1 second stun, but it's another full second stun for each god you've already hit and stunned. So she can stun an enemy god for up to 3 full seconds if she hits everybody with her ultimate. Burst, Chang'e gets a 4 out of 5. As I referenced the ult earlier, it can stun enemy gods, and then if you hit your 3-1 combo on them, that is really a death sentence for a lot of gods. Her 1 and 3 also do a lot of damage just in themselves, but you have to be fairly close to the enemies to kind of get that burst off. As far as objective utility goes, I gave her a 3 out of 5. She does bring a lot of healing and sustain to sieges. She can also heal minions, which is a fairly underrated thing to have when you're trying to siege a tower or a phoenix or a titan. Survivability, I gave her a 3 out of 5. She does have a built-in Aegis and beads on her 2, which can allow her to survive in a lot of situations that she wouldn't, but it's such a long cooldown that she's pretty vulnerable after that, and the only other peel she has is her ultimate. Like most healers, Chang'e excels in the team fight. I gave her a 4 out of 5. She has a ton of team heals that she can bring into a fight. She has ultimate that can set herself or teammates up for kills. She is one of the quintessential brawler gods, so if you want to group up and fight, Chang'e is your god. Overall, Chang'e gets an 18 out of 30, which puts her in our B tier. Next up, we have Chronos, the god of time. When it comes to poke, Chronos gets a 3 out of 5. His third ability, Stop Time, can hit at 70 units, which is further than auto attack range. It is a ramp to a stun, which also sets him up for his 55 unit one ability. So 2 damaging abilities at range that can be hit pretty consistently. Crowd control, however, Chronos gets a 2 out of 5. Only one of his abilities have CC on them. It is that stop time ability. It is 70 units, and it is a nice 1-second stun, but being it's the only crowd control in his kit, I gave him a 2. Burst, I gave Chronos a 3 out of 5. His 3-1 combo hits surprisingly hard, and if you can weave 1 or 2 autos in there as well, he does a lot of damage in a short amount of time. Objective utility, I gave Chronos a 4 out of 5, simply for the fact that he has a 35% magical power increase on his basic attacks as part of his 2. Super underrated part of Chronos' kit. It allows him to burn through any objective you put in front of him. Survivability, I gave Chronos a 4 out of 5. He does have some healing in his kit. He does have some movement speed stims, but really what it comes down to is his ultimate. He can rewind himself 8 seconds backwards in time. It's CC immune, so he has that get out of jail free card if he really needs to save himself. Team fight, I gave Chronos a 3 out of 5. He does have that ramp to root, which helps him and his allies kind of single someone out. But his X factor is that he commands all the attention. You have to kill him before he gets his ult off. So that helps in a team fight set other people up and not have the attention on them. In total, Chronos gets a 19 out of 30, which puts him in our A tier. Next up, we have Discordia, the goddess of strife, one of the most frustrating gods to play against. She lives up to her name. Poke, Discordia gets a 4 out of 5. Strife, her second ability, can hit at 60 units. Unruly Magic, her first ability, can hit at 55 units, but what really makes her Poke more potent is the fact that Strife can hit multiple enemies, and then that sets you up to hit 1 or 2 people with your Unruly Magic, and Unruly Magic bounces. So a lot of damage from a very safe distance for Discordia. Crowd control, Discordia gets a 4 out of 5. As I mentioned before, her Strife, her 2 ability, can hit multiple enemies, and if it does hit 2 or even 3 enemies, it causes something called madness, and the enemies fight each other. So it is a really good ability to disrupt your enemy team and ensure that you do damage as well. On top of that, her ultimate ability, if she hits it, she cripples and intoxicates enemies, which can also spread after that apple burst. So a lot of really good CC. Burst, Discordia gets a 3 out of 5. She can do a lot of burst damage if she hits the exact center of her 1 where all the projectiles bounce outward, but that's not that consistent to hit. And then the apple doesn't do damage right away. It takes a while to kind of ramp up and then explode. So a lot of damage, but not necessarily in a short amount of time. One of Discordia's weaknesses is her objective utility. She just doesn't have a lot of tools to help around any objective. She can't secure anything really with her ultimate, so she has to rely on her just normal damaging abilities. Not that great. She gets a 2 out of 5 here. Survivability, she gets a 3 out of 5. She does have a lot of self-peel, as I've referenced before. She also has a CC immune ultimate and a frame of CC immunity and damage immunity in her 3, her third ability, which can also go over walls. So she has kind of a lot of tools, but she's fairly immobile, so not an insane amount of survivability on her. I gave Discordia a 4 out of 5 when it comes to team fight. Very similar to Baba Yaga, she can bring so much chaos to those 3v3s between the madness on her Strife. She can go into invisibility in her 2 and keep enemies guessing where she is. She can hit an apple and intoxicate. She just really keeps the enemy team from doing what they want to do, and that's so valuable in a 3v3 mode. Overall, I gave Discordia a 20 out of 30, which puts her in our A tier. Next up is the goddess of magic, Eset. Poke, Eset gets a 3 out of 5. Both her silence and her wing gust are 55 unit attack range, which is hunter auto attack range. Her spirit ball, however, is a 70 unit range, so you can hit that from a long ways away, and the further you hit it, the more damage it does, which contributes to her poke rating. Crowd control, I gave Eset a 4 out of 5. Not only does her spirit ball have a 1 second stun on it, that's at close range, that's at max range. As long as you hit it within that radius, it will stun for 1 second, but her 3 has a silence and a slow on it, which are both very useful when put together. Burst, Eset gets a 3 out of 5. At max range, the spirit ball can definitely do a devastating amount of damage, but that, unless you're combining it with wing gust and then a charged up ultimate, which the charge on the ult takes a little bit of time, you're not going to have an insane amount of burst compared to other mages. Objective utility, Eset gets a 5 out of 5. This basically comes down to her ultimate circle of protection. Pretty much the best objective confirm in the game when it comes to things like Bull Demon King or even Titan, but also if you drop it at your tower, at the enemy's tower, either one of the Phoenixes, it's basically a no fight zone for 5 full seconds. So just a lot of ways that she can use that ultimate to be effective in objective fights. Survivability, I gave Eset a 2 out of 5. She is root immune and knockback immune in her 1, which helps her. She obviously has the silence and the stun. She has a little bit of healing on her ultimate, but that kind of takes time to channel. If you're getting dove, it's not as consistent to get that heal off compared to other healers, so not as much survivability as other gods. Teamfight, Eset gets a 4 out of 5. There's a reason that you see her in like the support role in Conquest, right? She can give her teammates a shield. She shares HP 5 and MP 5. The X Factor, her ultimate, can turn a fight on its head completely. So she just has a lot of tools to enable her team to more easily win fights. Overall, Eset gets a 21 out of 30, which puts her in the A tier. Next up, we have one of the most well-known hyper carries probably in the entire game, Queen of the Valkyries, Freya. Poke, Freya gets a 1 out of 5. She does have the ability to toggle ranged attacks with her 2, but that's only 55 units. Her ultimate ability also only goes 55 units, so pretty much everything she does has to be within that auto attack range. Crowd control, I gave Freya a 3 out of 5. She does have a slow on her pulse ability that ramps up from 15 to 25% based on level, and then the banish is a 1.5 second banish. They're in the air for 1.5 seconds. They can't be targeted or take damage, but it does set your teammates up when they come back down. Burst, I gave Freya a 3 out of 5. This is one of the harder ones for me to kind of rank, just because as the game gets later, Freya's burst gets so much better compared to other mages as far as scaling that it's really, really hard. She can have maybe a burst up to a 5 at the late stages of the game, but because it's not consistently throughout the entirety of the Joust match, I had to give her a 3. Objective utility, I gave Freya a 4 out of 5. Like most magical ADCs, the ability to just shred towers and objectives is definitely there. She also has bonus magic damage as part of her kit on top of auto attack damage, which is really, really good for objectives. And then lastly, she has the ultimate, which is also another safe way to do a ton of damage to things like Bull Demon and Titan if she needs to. Survivability, I gave Freya a 2 out of 5. She has Banish, which is a good way to peel for yourself, and then the ultimate is CC immune too, but outside of that, she's just so immobile. She can't get around walls. She can't really peel for herself very easily. When it comes to team fight, I gave Freya a 3 out of 5. Very similarly to like a Chronos, she just kind of commands attention, especially the later the game gets. And if you are able to just take that attention away from your teammates and do some damage yourself, it really can turn a team fight. Overall, Freya gets a 16 out of 30, which will put her in the B tier. We've already talked about the Mayan, Voodoo, and Egyptian gods of death, so let's add Hades, the Greek god of the underworld, to the mix. For Poke, I gave Hades a 1 out of 5. His first ability hits at a 20 unit radius. His second ability is a 40 unit range. His third ability is a 20 unit radius. And even his ultimate is a 30 unit radius. So unfortunately, everything Hades has to do, he has to put himself almost right next to the enemy. Crowd control, I gave Hades a 3 out of 5. He does have 4 different types of crowd control in his kit. A lot of it does depend on if he's able to blight his enemies, which is another part of his unique part of his kit. But he can slow, he can silence, he can fear, and then his ultimate, which is a giant circle vortex, kind of what Hades is known for. It's a pretty good form of CC. People can jump out of it pretty easily or sprint out of it, but overall, he does have a lot of forms of CC that work pretty well. Burst, I gave Hades a 2 out of 5. He does have a lot of burst possible in his kit, but I just can't bring myself to give him above a 2 because it's so dependent on him being able to blight minions or blight a wave, blight a camp, something. He has to do that to get a large amount of burst off, and something that's so dependent on your enemies misplaying is just not that great. Objective utility, I gave Hades a 2 out of 5. He does have his Blight, Devour Souls combo, which can do a decent amount of damage in securing objectives, but outside of that, he really only has his ultimate, which has to be channeled for such a long time that is pretty niche. Hades gets a 3 out of 5 in survivability. His normal attacks can debuff magical and physical power. His ultimate, he gains protections while also shredding protections around him. And then lastly, he's CC immune in his ult, and he has a leap / jump that can get over and around walls pretty effectively. Teamfight also gets a 3 out of 5 here. He does have team healing, which is something that's overlooked in Hades' kit quite a bit, but it is effective team healing if he can hit it. And then his ultimate, obviously, a giant CC ability that shreds protections from his enemies, so it allows you and your team to kind of follow up on that ultimate pretty easily. Hades has pretty good tools, but he just can't use them consistently enough, so he gets a 14 out of 30, making him the first god in our C tier. Known as the god with the 3 ults, let's talk about Hebo next. Hebo I gave a 2 out of 5 in poke. His first ability, Water Cannon, has a range of 40 units. His third ability, a Water Spout, has a range of 55 units, and his ult has a range of 55 units, so everything that he does damage-wise has to be within that Hunter auto attack range, which puts him in danger. Not to mention, Water Spout only has a radius of 10 units, which is one of the smallest radiuses in the game. He does have short cooldowns, which is good, but he doesn't have consistent poke enough for me to give him more than a 2. Crowd control, I gave Hebo a 3 out of 5. He only has a couple types of crowd control in his kit, but to me, certain crowd controls are more valuable than others, one of those being knockup because it can't be beads, and you can follow up on that while the enemy is in the air to do damage. He has a 10-second cooldown knockup, really good. You can use that pretty often. And then he also has up to a 40% slow on his magic carpet that can be deployed up to 85 units away, so pretty good long-range CC as well. Burst, I gave Hebo a 5 out of 5. There's a reason why people joke around that he has 3 ultimates. All 3 of his abilities do really good damage and they scale really well. His passive also allows him to get up to 15% extra magical damage, so if he hits you with 3 abilities and then the ultimate, it pretty much is a death sentence for anybody. He does have to put himself in extremely dangerous positions to get his burst off, but that doesn't make his burst any less potent. Objective utility, Hebo gets a 3 out of 5. He can bring kind of that crazy one-shot type damage to a BDK or a Titan fight, but outside of just pure damage, he doesn't bring that much compared to other mages. Survivability, I gave Hebo a 2 out of 5. He does have a CC immune ult. He has a stem where he can move faster on his carpet, but he can't really get around walls. He has one of the lowest health pools in the entire game for mages. One thing to note, he does have a root that's being removed from his 3 in the 9.3 update, so that could affect this, but as of right now, he gets dove pretty easily. Hebo's team fight gets a 3 out of 5. His carpet can be used to zone the enemy team off or cut them into a place where you want them to go. It can also be used to catch up to the enemy team if you're trying to secure a kill. Knockup can set up for you or your teammates to finish off a kill, and then obviously his insane damage just can always one-shot somebody, which turns any team fight into your favor. In total, Hebo gets an 18 out of 30, which puts him in our B tier. Why not add another god of the underworld to the discussion? Let's rank Hel. Poke, I gave Hel a 2 out of 5. Her first ability, both of them, Decay and Restoration, hit at 55 units. Decay does have a radius that can explode in at an additional 12 unit radius, so that does have kind of an additional way to poke enemies. All other forms of her damage have to be done in a radius around her, so she doesn't have great long distance damage. Crowd control, she gets a 1 out of 5. She only has a single slow built into her damage stance. It can scale up to 40%, but just having one single instance of crowd control and a soft crowd control at that, I had to give her a score of 1. I don't think many people think of Hel this way, but she does a lot of burst damage. I gave her a 4 out of 5. She has 3 damaging abilities paired with a debuff that kind of amplifies that damage. She can get a ton of damage out in a short amount of time. She does have to cycle through abilities, so it's not quite as quick as some other mages, but her burst is definitely up there. Objective utility, I gave Hel a 3 out of 5. This mostly comes down to sieging towers, Phoenix, and Titan. She has healing in her kit. She can also heal minions, so that keeps minions under tower for longer and attacking, and kind of forces your enemy to focus on minions in certain cases. Also keeps you and your allies alive for a longer period of time, so she can be very useful in those sieges. Survivability, I gave Hel a 3 out of 5. Insane amount of self-heal in her kit. She has a slow that's really really her only form of peel, so not that great. She can't get around walls, but she does have CC immunity built into her kit as well. I gave Hel a 5 out of 5 when it comes to team fight. She just has so many tools. She has single target healing, team healing. She can heal allies. She has a protection debuff on the enemies. She has an ability that can cleanse CCs. If your teammates get CC'd, she can cleanse that and keep you safe. Not to mention, pairing all of this with really decent damage means that having Hel in your team fight just makes basically every team fight easier for you. Altogether, Hel gets a score of 18 out of 30, which puts her in our B tier. Next up, we have Hera and her trusty companion Argus. Poke, Hera gets a 3 out of 5. Her first ability, Royal Assault, has a range of 45 units, which puts her inside of that Hunter auto attack range, kind of puts her in danger. Polymorph can hit at 80 units, which is a long ways away, but it is kind of a slower traveling ability, so it's not that easily hit. She can drop Argus at a range of 65 too, but you're not really using Argus to poke, so she gets a 3 out of 5 here. Crowd control, Hera also gets a 3 out of 5. Her polymorph, which turns the enemy into an animal, is good, but a little bit unpredictable compared to other CC abilities. She also has a 20% slow on that, so it makes it a little bit easier for you or your teammates to follow up. And then lastly, she has her Argus, which if she drops on an enemy, does give a knockup, really good CC, and then if he hits his second attack, is also a slow there. So pretty good overall CC, but not as consistently hit. Burst, Hera gets a 3 out of 5. She can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time with the Argus combo, dropping him on someone and then hitting the polymorph into the 1. The 1 has to be pretty precise though to get that 15% extra damage, so mostly Hera's damage does come from Argus being deployed for a longer amount of time and the enemy's not being able to kill it. Objective utility, I think this is really where Hera excels. I gave her a 5 out of 5. You can put Argus on Tower, you can put him on Phoenix, you can put him on Titan, you can put him on Bull Demon King. It's basically an extra god that you have for any sort of sieging situation. He can tank those shots for you if you're willing to take that objective without a wave there. You can do that pretty easily with him, so I think it's a very underrated part of Hera's kit and maybe the best part of it. Hera gets a 3 out of 5 in survivability. She does have a built-in shield in her kit, which can help her survive a little bit longer. Her polymorph can be used as a peel, but it really takes kind of long to get out in a hectic team fight situation. She can use Argus to peel for her too, but a coordinated team is just going to jump on Hera. She's pretty immobile. She can't get over walls or anything. And once Hera dies, Argus dies. Team fight, Hera gets a 4 out of 5, and basically it all comes down to Argus. If you don't know, at full level, Argus can have 3,500 health, so at any time when you deploy him, you're basically summoning another god to the battlefield, and as we all know, 4 is greater than 3. You're putting yourself at that one-person advantage in any team fight that you want. In total, Hera/Argus gets 21 out of 30, which puts her in our A tier. Next up, we have the god of portals, transitions, and escaping when he has absolutely no right to, Janus. Poke, I gave Janus a 2 out of 5. His first ability, Portal, is deployable at 55 units, which is auto attack range, but it's a super small ground target of 10 radius. Not that consistently hit. Same thing with Unstable Vortex. That has a range of 70, but it has one of the stranger hitboxes in the entire game of Smite. So again, not super consistent poke. Crowd control, I gave Janus a 2 out of 5. He has a banish in his portal, but again, it's a very small area. It's only 10 radius when you put that on the ground, so it can be avoided pretty easily. It's usually single target, and it is a banish, so that means that the enemy can't be attacked while they're in the air. They have to come down before they can take any of that damage, so not as valuable as something like a Hebo knockup, even though it's the same size. And then he does have a 25% slow on the threshold that he puts on the ground, but that is again another thin ability that is pretty easily telegraphed. Burst, Janus gets a 3 out of 5. He does have some pretty good single target lockdown with his combo, but he doesn't have as confirmable damage as a lot of other gods, and it doesn't do quite as much unless he's at that full portal distance. Objective utility, he gets a 3 out of 5 as well. Kind of comes down to his ultimate. It is a global ult, so he can literally hit it from entirely across the map. He can do some things like steal BDK away from literally back at his base. He can also portal in and take BDK with his abilities if he wants to. So there are just some things like that that are a little bit cheesy, but do help Janus confirm objectives. Survivability, he gets a 3 out of 5. It kind of all comes down to his portals. He can use them to go through walls if he really needs to. He survives in a lot of situations that he shouldn't, just because he can get to places that other gods can't. Especially if you think about something like his ultimate, he can get through 3 or 4 sets of walls and no god is catching him. Team fight, Janus gets a 2 out of 5. A lot of what he does is very single target focused, and since it's a smaller map and it's not huge like a conquest map, strategies like a dropship where you're taking all of your teammates and going through a portal into a fight just isn't quite as valuable here. Overall, Janus gets a 15 out of 30, which makes him the second god in our C tier. The next god we'll be scoring is Kukulkan. Kukulkan gets a 4 out of 5. His Zephyr, his one ability, can go a full 70 units, does really good damage itself, and then Whirlwind, his third ability, is deployable at 55 units, but it has a radius of 20, so an effective range of about 70 to 75 units on that ability as well, and it can hit multiple enemies, which is always super powerful. Crowd control, Kuku gets a 2 out of 5. He does have a slow that stacks up to 40% at full level on his Zephyr ability, but it's usually single target unless the enemies are super tightly grouped, and then he has a knock to the side on his Spirit of the Nine Winds ability, but that doesn't really lend itself to any sort of additional follow-up, so Kuku's pretty weak when it comes to CC. Kuku gets a 4 out of 5 when it comes to burst. I'm not going to get into any specific build, but if you're building any sort of mana, which you should on any mage, Kuku gets 4% of that as magical power. His Whirlwind, damage over time ability, but good damage there. His 1 is a good amount of burst damage, but what it really comes down to is his ultimate. Spirit of the Nine Winds can legitimately one-shot people, so if you have that in your kit, you're always going to have good burst. Not quite as confirmable as some other mages, so I gave him a 4 instead of a 5. Objective utility, Kuku also gets a 4 out of 5 because a lot of the AI that you're working with, the Bull Demon, minions, Titan, they don't necessarily walk out of your Whirlwind. They're taking more damage than a god normally would. Whirlwind also clears wave at basically any level in Joust, so you can use that to defend, you can use that to clear wave and then set your team up to siege, and then obviously Spirit of the Nine Winds can take any of those objectives, BDK or Titan, from 130 units away. Survivability is where Kuku struggles a little bit. He has a movement speed stim, and then he has a slow that he can maybe use to peel for himself, but his only real peel is kind of damage, and he gets dove pretty easily because he can't get over walls and he has no CC immune abilities in his kit. Team fight, I also gave Kuku a 2 out of 5. He can have some pretty okay zoning tools with the Whirlwind, but aside from just pure damage, he really doesn't bring that much to a 3v3. He can't debuff the enemies, he can't buff his own teammates, so pretty mediocre in that category. Add all these scores up, Kukulkan gets an 18 out of 30, which puts him in our B tier. The next mage on our tier list is Merlin, the OG wizard. I gave Merlin a 4 out of 5. He has 6 damaging abilities total, and 4 of those 6 damaging abilities can actually be hit at longer than 55 units auto attack range, so he does a lot of damage from a pretty decent distance away. Not to mention, a lot of his abilities also go over or around walls, which is an additional way to poke your enemies. Crowd control, Merlin gets a 2 out of 5 out of his 6 abilities. Only 2 of them have any sort of crowd control. One is a pull/knock-up, which is the better of the 2, and the other one is a slow that has to stack up to 40%, so few CC abilities, neither one of them overly strong. Burst, Merlin gets a 3 out of 5. He does have good damage, but a lot of what he does is a little bit more damage over time. The 2 in his ice stance is kind of damage over time. The 1 in his fire stance is damage over time, and the vortex on both of his purple stances kind of take a little bit longer to hit and do damage, so burst overall okay, not great. Objective utility, he gets a 2 out of 5. I would say really the only thing that he has as far as being useful on objectives is his fire stance. He has a lot of shred that can be used to take objectives quickly, but outside of that he doesn't have that many tools compared to other mages to really help at any other objectives. Survivability, Merlin gets a 3 out of 5. His third ability, Flicker, is a teleport, so that means that he can get out of certain things like roots where other gods with dashes couldn't. Flicker can also go over walls. It is a shorter range, that 30 unit range, so you got to be closer to walls to do that, but he can get over them. to safety, and because he has such good poke, he can kind of stay back and be that backline mage and stay safer than a lot of other mages can. Team fight, Merlin gets a 4 out of 5. Where he's strong here is his versatility. If you need zoning or displacement, you have the purple stance. If you need to shred tanks, you have the fire stance. If you need just pure damage, you have the ice stance. It really allows you and your teammates to dictate the fight because Merlin can be used in so many different ways. Overall, Merlin gets a 19 out of 30, which puts him up in our A tier. After Merlin, it's only appropriate that we talk about the other evil side of Camelot, Morgan Le Fay. Poke, Morgan Le Fay gets a 3 out of 5. Her first ability, Sigil Mastery, can hit at a deploy range of 55 units, but also has an outer radius of 20, so effectively that can be, closer to a 75 unit range there. Dragonflight has a max range of 60 as well. If you hit that farthest range, her 3, Shroud of Wildfire, has a max range of 60 as well. So all of those things can be hit just a little bit further than auto attack range, and then her ultimate can be hit at an area of 100 units away, so that's a lot of poke too. Crowd control, Morgan Le Fay gets a 4 out of 5. On her 1 alone, she has a choice between a 1-second fear or a 35% slow, both of those being on a 13-second cooldown. Very, very potent, very good crowd control abilities, but also she has a knock up and a knock back on her 2 Dragonflight. First, Morgan Le Fay gets a 3 out of 5. She can do good damage overall with her abilities, but her ult takes a little bit to channel, so it's not that big one-shot ability that you really like to see, and she can't really cycle through her abilities quickly enough to get that insane burst. Objective utility, Morgan Le Fay gets a 2 out of 5. She does have a clone on her 1, which you might think would be effective in tanking towers and things like that, but it has 30% of Morgan's health, so it kind of gets one-shot and it gets prioritized by those objectives. Not super useful, and she doesn't have a really good way to confirm objectives like some other mages. Survivability, Morgan gets a 3 out of 5. She does have percent health heal on her ultimate, which can save her in some sticky situations. She has the knock up, knock back on her 2, and the fear to kind of keep herself alive and peel for herself, but if those things are down, she does get dove pretty easily. Team fight, Morgan Le Fay gets a 3 out of 5. She does have a lot of displacement and chaos she can bring to those 3v3 fights, kind of keeping the enemies from doing what they really want to do. She also has a debuff on her 3 that she can refresh with auto attack, so if you're trying to burn down one person really quickly, she can help do that, but nothing too exceptional in the team fight category. Overall, Morgan Le Fay gets an 18 out of 30, which puts her in the B tier. Next up on our list, we have Nox, the Goddess of Night. Nox gets a 3 out of 5 in the poke category. Her first ability, Shadow Lock, can be hit at a 65 range, longer than auto attacks. Siphon Darkness, her second ability, can also be hit at a range of 55, but the radius is 20, so it can be hit further than that auto attack range too, which is nice for poke damage. And then her last ability, her ultimate ability I should say, Night Terror, can hit at a range of 120, and it is on a low enough cooldown that you don't feel that bad using it for poke. Crowd control, Nox gets a 5 out of 5. This is why you pick this god. Her 1 Shadow Lock has a root and a cripple for 2 full seconds. That by itself is insane. Her 2 Siphon Darkness is a radius of 20 that silences enemies. That by itself is insane, but when you combine the two and you can hit Siphon Darkness and Shadow Lock within each other's radius, it is just too good. It locks the enemy down and can set up for you and your teammates more than any other CC can. Burst, Nox gets a 3 out of 5. Her 2-1 combo can do a ton of damage, but that combined with her ultimate, which is a more of a damage over time ability, she doesn't quite have the scaling and the damage and the burst that a top tier mage has. Objective utility, she gets a 2 out of 5. She does okay in sieging because of her zoning with her silence, but she really can't confirm objectives. Her ultimate can't hit only enemy gods and walls, so she doesn't do great in taking things like BDK or Titan. Survivability, Nox gets a 3 out of 5. She does have pretty good tools to peel for herself, as I've mentioned before with her CC abilities, but she also has a dash on her 3 Shadow Step, which allows her to go into her allied gods and be untargetable for up to 8 seconds. So she can keep herself pretty safe. Team fight, Nox gets a 4 out of 5. I've already listed all the ways that she can ruin your day with crowd control, but something that people forget is that her ultimate can do up to 40% damage reduction for 5 seconds if you hit an enemy god. So if you think about that, Nox hits an ult on one or multiple enemies, your team is doing twice as much damage almost as them for a full 5 seconds. Huge advantage in team fights, severely underrated. Nox's total score comes out to 20 out of 30, which puts her in our A tier. The next mage on our tier list is the Guardian of Heaven, Nuwa. Poke, Nuwa gets a 3 out of 5. Her first ability, Fog, does go further than that 55 unit attack range. I wouldn't recommend using that as Poke because it's so slow that it's easily avoided. Her claim minions can be summoned at 40 units, but you can explode them at 65 units. That's kind of more single target damage, and I wouldn't recommend doing this, but you can use her ultimate for Poke since it's a global ult. It will do damage to every single god on the map on the enemy team. Crowd control, Nuwa gets a 2 out of 5. The only real crowd control in her kit is the stun that happens when you explode her claim minions. That is a 1 second stun that can be scaled all the way up to a 1.4 second stun if it's leveled 5 times. She does have a root on every 5 auto attacks, but that's fairly inconsistent, so I'm not going to rank that super highly. Burst, I gave Nuwa a 4 out of 5. The way her clay soldiers work, if you have multiple of them, each time they dash into an enemy, they reduce protections per stack. So you can get up to 60 protection reduction on that initial dash, and then if you explode those claim minions, that's another huge burst of damage. On top of that, she has her ultimate, which is a guaranteed hit, so she can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. Objective utility, I gave Nuwa a 4 out of 5. That may seem weird at first glance, but I think her clay soldiers are severely underrated when it comes to any sort of pushing on the enemy team. If you have 3 clay soldiers, each clay soldier gets 200 plus 20% of Nuwa's maximum health. The way it works under towers is the tower can only attack one of those clay soldiers, right? So you have a lot of time at these objectives to really have your clay soldiers soak up that damage. It gives you and your teammates time to really output all of your damage onto the objective. Survivability, Nuwa gets a 2 out of 5. She does have some bamboozability in her mysterious fog that can trick enemies. She has a little bit of self-peel with her claim minions that kind of takes a little bit longer to put out than you'd like. And she does have a CC immune ult, but she really is kind of a sitting duck. She doesn't have a lot of mobility, and she just gets easily dove most of the time. Team fight, Nuwa gets a 2 out of 5. The only real setup she has and shred for her team is her claim minions, which is kind of more of a single target. And then her ultimate, although it is a global ult and should do a lot of damage, it is pretty underwhelming in most cases. In total, Nuwa gets a 17 out of 30, which puts her in our B tier. Let's keep it rolling with another heavenly god, ruler of the heavens, Olorun. Poke, I gave Olorun a 3 out of 5. His first ability, Focused Light, has a minimum range of 45, but that can be charged all the way up to a max range of 110. So this is some of the longest poke in the game for a mage outside of ultimate abilities, and that ability can also crit, which is an extra little bit of poke that not a lot of mages have. He also has Overflowing Divinity, his second ability, which can damage at a 65 range, so just another tool to poke. Crowd Control, Olorun gets a 4 out of 5. His third ability, Consecration, does have a knockback on it, but really what it comes down to is his ultimate, Sanctified Field, has a super unique CC that is basically time dilation. So while you're in that ult, you do everything slower, whether that's jumping, attacking, dashing. For the enemy team, you are moving in slow motion. It is a super insane ability, and it is so good. Burst, Olorun gets a 2 out of 5. He really doesn't have the ability to burst enemies down. He's an auto attack ADC type mage, so his burst ability does come a little bit later in the game, but even then, it's nothing compared to a lot of these other burst mages. Objective utility, Olorun gets a 4 out of 5. His passive, upon reaching 150 magical power from items, he does get a 15% crit chance, which is very unique among mages. He can scale that even further with more magical power. So that, mixed with his Sanctified Field, which gives him another 30% stim, allows him to really shred any objectives in his path. Survivability, Olorun gets a 2 out of 5. He does have a knockback and a slow on his 3, but it has to be within a 20 unit radius of him, so range damage still kind of wrecks Olorun, and he can use his ult to peel, but even then, a good instance of beads allows the enemy to dive on him pretty easily. Team fight, Olorun gets a 5 out of 5. It all comes down to his ultimate. Like I said before, his ult, giant field that slows time. The enemy's moving 40% slower. You're moving 30% faster. It takes up the entire lane in Joust. So it is such a tide-changing ultimate that it doesn't really compare to anything else in Smite. Overall, Olorun gets a 20 out of 30, which puts him up in our A tier. Alright, that's enough about the heavenly gods. Let's go back to the underworld and talk about the queen, Persephone. Poke Persephone gets a 4 out of 5. Her first ability, Bone Rush, hits at a 65 range. It does a lot of damage by itself. Harvest, her second ability, has a range of 50, a explosion radius of 12.5, so that's effectively a 62.5 range ability as well that does damage. But when her flowers bloom, that's when she can really do her poke. So each flower, once it blooms, she can send out using an auto attack. Those can go through walls, they can go down the lane, they can go right into an enemy's face, and each one does 180 plus 35% of her magical power as an automatic tracking bite. So she just simply has some of the best, safest poke in the entire game. Crowd Control Persephone gets a 4 out of 5. Her first ability, she has up to a 30% slow for 2.5 seconds, which is a really long duration for CC and Smite. And then obviously her ultimate, if she hits an enemy god, it will cripple and root them. They're stuck in the middle. Or if it doesn't hit them but still hits in the radius, they're going to be crippled and bound so that they're slowed while running away from the center. Really good CC. She can easily hit 2 or 3 enemy gods every single time with her ultimate in Joust, and multiple gods CC'd at once is just really, really nice. First, Persephone gets a 4 out of 5. Every single one of her abilities does damage. If she hits an ultimate at all, it's pretty much an instant death sentence with any combination of her abilities. She also has a lot of damage. If she's getting dove, she can drop Harvest at her feet and flourish away, and that can in some cases one-shot people if it's leveled up high enough. Objective utility, she gets a 3 out of 5. Because she does have those 4 damaging abilities, she can secure objectives pretty effectively, and then her ultimate can always be used either as a sieging tool to keep enemies, away from you burning down a tower or a phoenix, and opposite, if you're trying to defend, it can be used to keep them in an area away from your own. Survivability, Persephone gets a 3 out of 5. She does have built-in healing on her Harvest. She has a Flourish, which is a decently long-range dash that can also go over walls in certain areas of the map, and then she has CC immunity on her ultimate, which is always beneficial in staying alive. Team Fight, she gets a 4 out of 5. Kind of comes down to her ultimate again. Having one single ability that can CC the entire enemy team in Joust on a fairly low cooldown is just really, really good. Not quite as good as a Olorun ultimate, but pretty damn close. Overall, Persephone gets a score of 22 out of 30, which makes her the first god in our S tier. The next mage on our list is Poseidon. Poke, I gave Poseidon a 1 out of 5. His first ability, Tidal Surge, can travel up to 80 units, but it's such a small line ability and it's a slow traveling ability that it's pretty easy to dodge for the enemy team. Whirlpool can be deployed at 55 range, but that's kind of a damage over time ability too, so he doesn't have that great damage at range. Crowd Control, I gave Poseidon a 4 out of 5. His Whirlpool is a cripple and a vortex that both work really well together. He has a knockback on his 1 that can be used to peel for himself in certain situations, and then release the crack in his ultimate. If he hits the direct center of that, is a knock-up and a stun, both super good, and if he hits the outer edges of that, it's a slow. So he does have a lot of CC in his kit. Poseidon, I gave a 4 out of 5 in burst. If he's managing his passive effectively, he can get up to 20% bonus damage, and it is a pretty easy combination to hit his cripple into Kraken, which is a lot of damage if you hit it directly in the middle. Objective utility, I gave Poseidon a 3 out of 5. The Kraken is a great way to confirm objectives like Bull Demon King and Titan, and then he can be built pretty flexibly as a ADC style mage, which does also help him take towers and Phoenix. Survivability, I gave Poseidon a 1 out of 5. He's probably one of the easier mages to dive in the entire game. He does have additional movement speed with his passive, but he doesn't have a CC immune ult. He can't get around walls. He doesn't have great peel for himself, so he is one of those mages that is very, very susceptible to being dove on. Team Fight, I gave Poseidon a 2 out of 5. He doesn't really have anything in his kit that buffs his teammates or debuffs enemies or helps them in a team fight, aside from his giant ultimate, which is obviously good, but with that center ring being 15 unit radius, it's a lot harder to be effective, as Poseidon and other mages have better teamfight ultimates that can be used way more consistently. In total, Poseidon gets a score of 15 out of 30, which puts him in our C tier. The next god we'll be ranking is Ra. Poke, I gave Ra a 2 out of 5. The Celestial Beam, his first ability, does have a range of 80, but it's a fairly slow-moving, single-target-ish line ability, so not that easy to really use consistently. Divine Light, the god has to be within a 30-unit radius of Ra, so pretty close quarters there. And then Solar Blessing, he can deploy at a range of 55 with a radius of 20, so a little bit more poke, but there's really nothing keeping the enemy in that radius to keep taking damage, as it is a tick ability. Crowd Control, I gave Ra a 2 out of 5. His second ability, Divine Light, stacks a slow every 0.5 seconds on enemies close to him. That can slow enemies up to 25% if they're looking away from him. It does slow up to 50% if enemies are looking towards him for its full duration, but that's pretty conditional. And then he does have a blind if they're facing him at the time that 3-second lifetime detonates. So it's not that his CC is necessarily that bad, but it's not that confirmable, not that easy to hit on enemies. Burst, I gave Ra a 4 out of 5. He does have a very, very hard hitting ultimate, and if you are able to get your combo off of Divine Light to slow the enemy, hit them with a Celestial Beam, and then ultimate, that usually does one-shot people, so he does have that heavy burst potential. Objective utility, I gave Ra a 4 out of 5 as well. Obviously, Searing Pain, his ultimate, range of 120, really hard hitting ability that you can use to secure the Bull Demon or steal it in certain cases, but his 3 Solar Blessing also gives allies inside of that blessing increased protections and power along with heals. So any sort of sieging situation where you're inside the enemy tower for a long time, or you're really trying to get that high damage off in a short amount of time, that third ability really does help you and your team do that. Survivability, I gave Ra a 2 out of 5. He has a stacking movement speed stim on his passive that can get up to 15% movement speed, so that's helpful. He also has a cleanse on his 2 if he's being slowed, and a slow immunity. He has a CC immunity on his ultimate, which can help him avoid some damage, but he can't get around walls. He doesn't really have a huge amount of heals in his kit, and it's a ticking heal, so anybody that's diving him can usually burst him down pretty quickly. Team fight, I gave Ra a 3 out of 5. Obviously, heals are going to be big in any sort of team fight, so that is 1+. He has protections and power on that heal as well, which is kind of a bonus compared to some other healers, but he just doesn't have quite enough damage mixed with healing, mixed with any sort of utility in CC to be super useful, which is why I gave him a 3. Overall, Ra gets a 17 out of 30, which puts him in our B tier. The next mage in our tier list is everyone's favorite drummer, Raijin. Raijin, I gave a 4 out of 5 in poke. His first ability, Percussive Storm, can be hit at 65 range. That is further than auto attack, so he's pretty safe there. He also has Raiju that he can deploy at a 60 unit range. And if you're not familiar with how Raiju works, if the Raiju is inside an enemy, he can actually detonate Raiju from up to 65 away using his first ability as well. And then Raiju will bounce to multiple enemies doing damage. So he does a lot of damage from a safe distance. Crowd control, Raijin gets a 3 out of 5. He does have a 15% slow when he deploys Raiju. That can stack up to a 30% if he hits that target again. Thunder Crash, his third ability, has a super short mesmerize of 0.3 seconds, but that mez can be used to confirm a pretty decent amount of damage. And then lastly, his ultimate, Taiko Drums. He has the choice of using Taunt or Fear, which, since he has the choice, it is a very versatile way that he can kind of use his ultimate to either save himself or pull enemies in for more damage. First, I gave Raijin a 3 out of 5. He does have 4 damaging abilities that all do pretty decent damage on their own, but to me his damage is a little bit more conditional compared to other similar bursty mages. His 1, he has 3 separate hits that he has to hit all of them to get his max damage out. His ultimate has 4 separate hits that he has to hit to get his max damage out. And although Raiju does have a lot of single target burst damage, even that is conditional on whether or not there are enemies near. Objective utility, I gave Raijin a 2 out of 5. You can sick his Raiju on Bull Demon King and Titan, but really outside of that, he doesn't have that effective of a burst to try to secure objectives, and he doesn't do anything to help his teammates or himself take tower or Phoenix. Survivability, I gave Raijin a 3 out of 5. He does have a dash that can go over walls. His ultimate is CC immune, so that can save him, and it also has a fear attached to it, so you can kind of push enemies away if they're trying to dive. but his dash is one of the easiest dashes to interrupt in the entire game, and he does kind of get dove pretty easily because of that fact. Teamfight, I gave Raijin a 4 out of 5. Because of Raiju, he does have a pretty easy time spreading his damage out among the entire enemy team, and then his ultimate does have the kind of option for him to either pull enemies back in with a taunt, push them away with a fear, so he can kind of control those team fights if you get in those 3v3 situations. In total, Raijin gets a 19 out of 30, which puts him in our A tier. Proof that it's not the size but how you use it, let's talk about our next mage, Scylla. Poke, I gave Scylla a 4 out of 5. Her first ability, Sikkim, has a range of 65 that will root enemies as well, so it's good setup for you and your teammates. Crush has a range of 55, so not quite as long, but the radius of Crush is 20 units, so that is a kind of an effective range of closer to 75. Those are both good unit ranges to poke enemy gods at, but the thing that kind of sets her apart is that Crush is a large circle ability, and she can hit multiple enemies at once with Crush. Crowd control, Scylla gets a 3 out of 5. She has a root and a cripple on her Sikkim ability. Root alone isn't as good of a CC, but paired with cripple makes it really, really deadly for enemies. Crush also has a 30% slow. Again, that larger radius makes for really, really effective CC as well. First, I gave Scylla a 5 out of 5. There's a very short period in the beginning of the game where Scylla can't kill you with her Sikkim Crush combo, but after that, she hits level 5, she gets her ult. She has probably the best one-shot potential in the entire game with a single ability in I'm a Monster, and her combo just really does delete health bars. Not to mention her passive, she gets built-in power spikes every time she levels up one of her abilities to level 5, and if you happen to level Crush to level 5, you also get protection shreds, so she scales probably the best out of any mage as well. Objective utility, I gave Scylla a 4 out of 5. She has that huge damage to secure Bull Demon and Titan, but she also can insta-clear wave while zoning during any sort of sieges, so all of her tools that she has in her kit make her a really good god around all of the objectives. Survivability, I gave Scylla a 5 out of 5. I think she is the safest mage in Joust. With Sentinel, she has a built-in ward. She can place that down at 65 units, but can also continue walking after that. So she can be 80 units away, 90 units away, whatever. Once she hits that Sentinel ability again, she leaps back to that original placement of Sentinel. She can put a ton of distance between herself and the enemy team. She has peel for herself with the cripple. She has a little bit more peel with the slow. And then if worse comes to worse, she has a CC immune ultimate that gives her 35% movement speed up to 70% movement speed at level 5. So she just has a lot of tools to get away from a fight if she really needs to. Team fight, I gave Scylla a 3 out of 5 until she fully levels her Sikkim, which gives her a multi-person root, or fully levels her Crush, which gives her 15% magical protection reduction on enemy gods. Scylla's kit isn't really based around a team fight. It's mostly all about, I'm going to take the entire enemy team on and kill them myself. That means Scylla gets our top score so far, 24 out of 30, which puts her in our S tier. Our next mage is Sol, Norse goddess of the sun. Poke, I gave Sol a 3 out of 5. Her Stellar Burst can be deployed at a range of 55 units, but similar to like a Scylla Crush, it has a radius of 20, so you can poke from a little bit further away. It's got a pretty short cooldown, and it can hit the enemy wave along with enemy gods. Crowd control, I gave Sol a 2 out of 5. She does have a slow that can stack from 15 to 35% at max level. That's kind of a softer CC, and then she has a knock-up on her ultimate, but it's a small radius of 12, and you have to hit the first one, so her crowd control isn't the best. Burst, I gave Sol a 4 out of 5. She is somewhat dependent on her passive. If she has that full 100% heat, she gets 25% magical power, but if she does have that, a Stellar Burst and Supernova combo can really be very detrimental to enemy team health bars. Objective utility, I gave Sol a 5 out of 5. Not only can she confirm objectives like Bull Demon King and Titan, but her passive Unstable Manifestation, she gains percent magical power, she gains 30% attack speed at 100% heat, and she gets additional 15% damage on her basic attacks. So she's attacking faster, her basic attacks are doing more. That allows her to absolutely melt things like Tower and Phoenix. Survivability, I also gave Sol a 5 out of 5. She can peel for herself a little bit with Stellar Burst and her ultimate. She's also CC immune in her ult, which helps you survive in certain scenarios. She can heal with her one, but what really puts her in that elite tier is her third ability, Disapparate. Not only is she CC immune for about 3 seconds during that ability, but she's also untargetable, which means she doesn't take damage. Team fight, I gave Sol a 3 out of 5. She doesn't have that much that really helps her teammates. The knock-up on her ultimate can be useful. The slow can also be useful to help set up a little bit, but she doesn't necessarily have any other real buffs. She can be a distraction to the enemy team to the point that your teammates can kind of take over and follow up on your damage, but outside of that, she doesn't do that well in team fight. Overall, Sol gets a 22 out of 30, which puts her in our S tier. The next mage on our list is the Morrigan, Celtic Pantheon. Quick disclaimer before I start ranking the Morrigan, because her ultimate allows her to turn into any other god in the game, I'm really going to try to stick to her kit alone and not any other god specific kit. What I will do, however, is take into account the fact that she could turn into any other god and how that can be useful to the team. Poke, I gave the Morrigan a 2 out of 5. The only real ability that she can use to poke in her kit is her second ability, Dark Omen. That does have a range of 70 on it, and it does have pretty decent damage, but because it's more single target focused, it's just really not that strong. Crowd Control, I gave the Morrigan a 2 out of 5. The only real CC she has in her kit is a 1-second stun on her one ability, but she does have to be within a 30 unit range to hit that, which puts her in kind of extreme danger in Joust, so she does not have a very high crowd control rate. First, I gave the Morrigan a 4 out of 5. Her passive Doomsayer allows her to do up to 9% damage of a target's max HP just by hitting the third attack in her hit chain. She also has Dark Omen, which is a long range chunk ability that applies an omen to gods, making them take more damage over time. That, mixed with Deadly Aspects and the stun into another auto attack, really does give her a respectable amount of burst. Objective utility, I gave the Morrigan a 2 out of 5. Her kit isn't super useful for bursting down Bull Demon King or Titan. She gets unstealthed under Tower, under Phoenix. Her minion, her Phantom, dies if it takes any damage, so it can't be really used to tank at all. She just doesn't have that much use around the objectives in Joust. Survivability, I'm going to give the Morrigan a 3 out of 5. Her stealth ability is one of the best misdirections in the game, and I think that bringing her ult into the discussion here makes sense because in the Joust game mode, there's usually somebody on either your team or the enemy team that she can turn into that has CC immunity or some sort of escape that lets her live. Team fight, I gave the Morrigan a 4 out of 5. She pretty clearly indicates her intent to CC an enemy god with her stun, so your team can follow up pretty easily. There's also the surprise factor that you can catch your enemies off guard. Now they're on the back foot in a team fight. And then lastly, I am going to bring up her ultimate again. Because she can turn into anybody in the current game, she has 5 other options, 5 kits to choose from, and that means that she can pretty much fit any role that you need her to. If you need her to peel more, she can turn into a guardian. If you need her to double dive, she can turn into a warrior. Because she is so versatile and has so many options in the way that you can use her ultimate, she can approach any team fight and fit any role. In total, the Morrigan gets a score of 17 out of 30, which puts her in our B tier. The next mage in our tier list is Thoth. Poke, I gave Thoth a 5 out of 5. It kind of all revolves around his third ability, Glyph of Pain. When he has this ability up, it's a transparent wall that he can put in front of him, and it makes all his other abilities do more damage and have a range increase of 30. So normally both his 2 and his 1 have a range of 55, but with that glyph up, they can go up to 85. So as you can see, super long range. He also gets pen on his abilities just due to his passive, so he can poke from a long ways away. Not to mention, his abilities go through walls, so he can poke at things like red buff or blue buffs without really putting himself in any danger at all. Crowd control, I gave Thoth a 2 out of 5. Pretty simple. He only has one real crowd control ability. It's his Evade and Punish. It is a root on the first god he hits and a slow on any subsequent gods, so just not very much crowd control. Burst, I gave Thoth a 4 out of 5. He can, if he hits his root set up for himself, each subsequent hieroglyphic assault after that will do 1x, 1.2x, 1.4x damage, so that alone can really chunk enemies. And then he has his ultimate on top of that, which does have that one-shot potential. Objective utility, I gave Thoth a 4 out of 5. He does have really good confirm with his ultimate on objectives like Bull Demon and Titan, but something I think is a little bit underutilized or maybe undervalued is his Glyph of Pain also gives allies basic attack projectile a damage bonus. So it can be used, you put it in front of you and your allies, you can burn down Phoenix, and towers pretty easily as well. Survivability, I gave Thoth a 2 out of 5. If enemies happen to get on you, you're going to have a very, very hard time surviving. The only CC you have to peel for yourself is your dash. Usually you're using your dash to get away. You want to dash through your Glyph of Pain, but even then your dash can get interrupted. You can't get around walls. You have no CC immunity in your kit, so he is a very, very dangerous god, and your positioning has to be really, really good to stay alive. Team fight, I gave Thoth a 4 out of 5. He does a lot of damage consistently from range to multiple enemies, and a lot of times he forces your enemies to put themselves in a bad position to try to kill him. He does have a long range route that can set up for other things from your teammates, and then lastly he finally has that Glyph of Pain that can help you and your teammates do a little bit more damage. Overall, Thoth gets a score of 21 out of 30, which puts him in our A tier. Next mage on our list is Tiamat, the goddess with literally 10 abilities. Poke, I gave Tiamat a 3 out of 5. She doesn't have the easiest confirmable poke damage, but she has a lot of options on how she wants to apply it. For her one primordial onslaught, that has a range of 70, so that's a pretty far poke damage. Ruination, her flying 2, also has a range of 55, but it's a triangular target, so that actually hits closer to about 65 in the middle of that ability too. She has a 60 unit range on her 2 in ground stance, and then her ultimate in flying stance, she has a couple options, and the cooldown is so low that you actually can use Kusariku or her tornado as poke. Crowd control, I gave Tiamat a 3 out of 5. She has a stun on her 2 in flying stance, which isn't really that easily confirmable. Pretty easy for the enemy to avoid it. She has a 1 second 80% slow on her ultimate, the Beast, which I think is her best CC ability. She has a knock-up at the end of her Tornado ultimate, which is pretty easy to avoid as well. And then she does have a knock-up in her ground stance too, which is pretty small. Burst, I gave Tiamat a 4 out of 5. She has 10 abilities. Every single one of them does damage, so she has a lot of options to decide how she wants to chain her abilities together to do maximum damage possible. Objective utility, I gave Tiamat a 3 out of 5. She doesn't have really great ways to confirm objectives like Bull Demon or Titan, but she does have deployable serpents that she can use that go down the lane, so those can be used to tank Phoenix, Tower, and Titan as well. It doesn't really work as well on Bull Demon because they always try to get back to lane, but they can be used to tank those tower shots just to give your team a little bit more time to be in that sieging range without taking damage. Survivability, I gave Tiamat a 4 out of 5. A lot of that comes from her passive where she can gain up to 5 scales. Those give her damage mitigation and also extra health up to 1250 at full levels, so that gives her a lot of tankiness. She also has self-peel in the form of knockups, stuns, and 80% slows. And then lastly, she has CC immunity in her ground stance ult, which allows her to avoid some of the other team's CCs. Team fight, I gave Tiamat a 4 out of 5. One thing I haven't mentioned is that she can execute minion camps. So when that happens, she consumes 1 buff for herself, drops an extra one that her teammate can pick up, and if she did consume that buff, Tiamat can also pick up a second buff, which gives her team effectively 2 extra buffs, which is an obvious advantage in team fights. In addition to that unique aspect of her kit, she still has 10 abilities that she can use, and it enables her to be very diverse in team fights. If you need CC, she can bring that. If you need to finish kills, she can bring that. If you need her to tank, she can bring that. So she is just very effective overall in those team fight situations. Overall, Tiamat gets a score of 21 out of 30, which puts her in the A tier. Next up, we have Vulcan, Blacksmith of the Gods. Poke, I gave Vulcan a 4 out of 5. His first ability, Backfire, has a range of 55. His third ability, Magma Bomb, has a range of 60, which isn't a whole lot of range, but the thing that makes Vulcan unique is that his second ability, Inferno Cannon, is a deployable, so if he puts his Inferno Cannon down, it's going to do damage to anybody that walks within a 50 unit range. Vulcan doesn't have to be anywhere near his turret. The turret is still going to auto target on the enemy and do damage to them. Crowd control, Vulcan gets a 2 out of 5. The only CC he has in his kit is a knockback. It is a good type of CC, but it's a small radius and not that easy to confirm. First, Vulcan gets a 4 out of 5. His Inferno Cannon inherits Vulcan's penetrations. Not only that, if he hits a backfire on a target and they get hit by Inferno Cannon, they're taking 15% more damage. So a knock-up Inferno Cannon backfire combo will kill enemy squishies, and his ultimate, although harder to hit, if he hits that at max range, it's another one of those abilities that can legitimately one-shot. Objective utility, Vulcan gets a 4 out of 5. Not only is his ultimate a really good confirmation tool, his turret, because it has health and protections, can be put in tower range, in Phoenix range, and tank those shots for your team. It can also be really good area denial if you're defending, or to keep them out of a siege range if you're trying to go on offense. Survivability, Vulcan gets a 2 out of 5. He only has his knockback to peel for himself. He does have additional movement speed if he's consistent in hitting abilities, but outside of that, he doesn't have any CC immunity in his kit. He can't get over walls, so he does get dove pretty easily. Team fight, I give Vulcan a 3 out of 5. He does have really good area control with his turret and his ultimate, and good damage overall, but really he doesn't bring anything exceptional to a team fight. He's good, but not great. Overall, Vulcan gets a 20 out of 30. That puts him in our A tier. We have finally made it to the Z's. The next god on our list is Zeus. Poke, I gave Zeus a 4 out of 5. Both his first ability, Chain Lightning, and his second ability, Aegis Assault, have a deploy range of 55 units, but his first ability, Chain Lightning, can arc across to enemies, and that can be hit on things like Vulcan Turret, on any sort of pets or deployables. And then if your damage arcs to an enemy god, they have a detonate charge on them, and Zeus can hit that from literally across the map. Crowd control, I gave Zeus a 2. He does have a 30% slow for 2 full seconds on his first ability, and that can arc across to multiple enemies, which makes it just a little bit more valuable. Burst, Zeus gets a 5 out of 5. With his passive, he can do up to 90% damage increase to targets with 3 charges. His detonate charge also can go up to a 2.4 damage multiplier if he has those charges on an enemy, and his ultimate, Lightning Storm, can get up to 275% additional magic power damage on it. He's one of the highest damaging mages in the game, and he can get his damage off on multiple enemies at once. Objective utility, I gave Zeus a 3 out of 5. He does have really good confirmation on Bull Demon King and Titan, but he doesn't really bring anything exceptional to a tower or a Phoenix Siege. Survivability, Zeus gets a 1 out of 5. He really struggles when he gets dove on. They did buff his Aegis Assault to give him a little bit of movement speed, but it's still really not enough in Joust. He can't peel for himself with a 30% slow. If he gets dove, he will get his damage off, but he is most likely dying. Team fight, Zeus gets a 3 out of 5. He does have a huge ability ultimate that does a lot of damage, but aside from just pure damage, Zeus doesn't bring that much to a team fight compared to other mages. This is probably going to be my most controversial score, but I just don't think Zeus has a safe enough kit for him to be top tier in Joust. Either way, he still gets an 18 out of 30, which puts him in our B tier. We finally made it, the last mage on our list. Let's talk about Zhong Kui. Poke, Zhong Kui gets a 1 out of 5. His 1, Expose Evil, does have a range of 55 units, but his second ability, Exorcism, has a cone range of 40. His third ability, Book of Darkness, has a radius of 20, so even closer. And Recall Demons, his ultimate, has a range of 40 as well. Everything Zhong does, he has to do within that auto attack range, which just puts him in danger. Crowd control, Zhong gets a 3 out of 5. He does have a 20% slow on his 1, and then his third ability, Book of Demons, can stun for up to 2 seconds if the target is marked. So those are both pretty decent CC abilities. Burst, I gave Zhong a 3 out of 5. Both Expose Evil and Recall Demons have a lot of damage attached to them, but unfortunately that damage is tick damage and damage over time, so unless he uses Exorcism, he really doesn't have that burst potential. Objective utility, I gave Zhong a 3 out of 5 as well. He doesn't really have that great confirm potential, but what he does have that I think people overlook sometimes is a 50% addition to his basic attack damage because of his Book of Demons ability. So he doesn't have quite the melt potential that a normal magical ADC does, but he can somewhat fill that role. This might come to a surprise to some people, but I also gave Zhong a 3 out of 5 in survivability. It is true that he can get up to 80 protections and he has some heals in his kit, but he's literally the only mage without any form of movement ability at all. No movement speed stim, no dash, no leap, nothing, which just makes him a sitting duck in Joust, and it makes it pretty easy to dive him. Team fight, I gave Zhong a 3 out of 5. He does bring that damage, but it's got to be pretty close range, and he doesn't have any sort of other utility to really make team fights an advantage in a 3v3 situation. Overall, Zhong Kui gets a total score of 16 out of 30, which barely squeaks him into our B tier. There you have it. There is my Mage Kit Joust tier list. I'm going to leave this screen up so you can screenshot. I will also get a link to the Google Sheets that I use to score all of these guys that has Guardians, Warriors, Assassins, Mages, and Hunters on it, and I try to keep that up to date with all the new gods as well. But if you made it this far, I assume that you found something entertaining or you learned something from this video, and if you did, I would really appreciate if you would subscribe. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so every single one of those helps me meet that goal. If you'd rather interact with me live, I will put my Twitch down in the description, as well as my Discord, where we talk about builds and strategies and things like that. But even if you do none of those things, I really do appreciate every single one of these views. It means a lot to me. So thank you guys again for stopping by.